Forgive me, internet, for I have sinned. I have only now just experienced the internet's most mind-boggling, hysterical, and existential fever dream for the first time in its absolute undisrupted entirety. And so may I present my strongly worded apology. What the fuck? This year, I started my journey through the ever-widening chasm of internet analog horror, from the Backrooms to Gemini Home Entertainment to Local 58 to the Mandela Catalogue. However, no series has been as overwhelmingly requested as Becky Sloan and Joseph Pelling's surrealist children's programming satire, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Now, before we get into it, I feel I have to clarify in every video like this that if you're well versed in all the theories, lore, fanfic and so on, this is inevitably going to feel like a generic, uninsightful boomer take, because I frankly don't care about any of that stuff. I like to experience everything at face value for what it is, rather than what the community deems it to be. And so because of that, for this video, I'm only going to focus exclusively on the 6 YouTube videos that make up roughly 32 minutes of runtime. This video is purely an outsider's perspective, and is far less about explaining the story, and more so exploring just what makes it so freakishly unsettling. So brace yourself and let's see what the crack is. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, and I don't just mean that as a statement, tells the story of 3 Sesame Street-style puppets: a withered duck who looks jaded from years teaching at a failing grammar school, a spaghetti lobster man-thing, and a dodgy European gift shop knockoff of Milhouse Van Houten, who in each episode are confronted and eventually tormented by a singing object looking to teach them about a random concept that children learn in their early primary/kindergarten years. However, as each episode progresses, things grow intensely surreal and disturbing, before unmasking the charming, colourful artifice of every children's educational program to reveal the bleak, mundane, and existentially cynical future they'll experience in adulthood. Now son, I grew up with Happy Tree Friends, Celebrity Deathmatch, Charlie the Unicorn, and all the nonsense on Newgrounds, so my childhood trauma is already finely tuned to make me the emotionally paranoid mess that I am. That the irony of Don't Hug Me's ugly unveiling is that it's kinda child's play for me. Of course, that does not soften the shell shock of the profoundly lonely and grindy experience of being a disillusioned adult, trapped in a perpetual cycle of monotonous misery, despite an upbringing that at one point inspired hope, optimism, and opportunity, while deeply unaware of how crushing the real world ultimately is. As Benjamin Franklin said, the only things certain in life are death and taxes, and so drowning yourself in bubbly escapism to recapture the innocence of your childhood is only a temporary solution to a problem that frankly never goes away. Right, so if that nihilism struck a nerve, don't worry, before we dive deeper into despair, we have a few hopeful words from this video's sponsor, Vezi. This is the cold, wet winter Irish weather, and this is me enjoying said weather. Why? Because here I am wearing Vezi's 100% waterproof overcast coat and Ulta high-top sneakers. This kind of weather used to make me feel miserable and reluctant to go out because I dreaded the soggy socks, the oppressive discomfort of overdressing, and the annoyance of avoiding constant puddles and mud. However, I recently fell in love with Vezi's Ulta high-top shoes. Usually I'm more of a fan of low-key, flatter shoes like the Vezi Soho sneaker for that smart, casual, indoor-outdoor look that can be worn all year round, and they are great, but in rougher conditions, these bad boys make me feel like a beast when tackling slippy and uneven terrain thanks to their tire-like traction, and their sturdy yet remarkably lightweight vegan leather gives me excellent foot and ankle support and additional warmth, making them perfect for rain, sleet, snow, and mud, especially on more strenuous adventures. Additionally, Vezi's overcast coat takes away the burden and restriction of traditional wetwear by reducing the need for multiple layers thanks to a cushy, soft fleece interior, and giving loose and relaxed freedom of movement with the lightweight Reglan sleeve design. And let's not forget Vezi's soft, insulated waterproof gloves that even provide touchscreen compatibility, so I never have to take them off. Honestly, it's all this that makes me feel motivated to get out this winter and enjoy the fresh air with my dog instead of hibernating inside like it's the end of the world. Vezi isn't just shoes and accessories, it's a lifestyle, so if you want to step into the season with style and savings and get in on the Christmas shopping early, head on over to vezi.com/ryanhollinger and enjoy exclusive discounts. And hey, what a better gift for me than supporting my channel. So, around 8 months prior to the release of Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, its style and conceit was first established in a video called Bad Things That Could Happen, which depicts what I think is a performative children's advert satirizing the notorious fear-mongering presentation of British PSAs, which I actually briefly mentioned in my video on Talk to Me, showing the potential dire consequences of everyday mundane activities. We have a cigarette starting a house fire, a sandwich covered in germs, a burst pipe alluding to drowning, a badly boiled egg alluding to the dangers of boiling water, tooth loss from eating too much licorice all sorts, which gives away just how British this is, and a mouse having its head dissected by a trap, leaving it to violently shake in shock. Now, I don't want to overanalyze humour, so I'm going to avoid that, but one of the prevailing appeals that I think makes Don't Hug Me and Bad Things so fiercely unique is that they're so intricately British in both tone and delivery that they feel inherently distinct from the typically Americanized content that goes viral on the internet, regardless of where it's made. On the outside, it's partially Monty Python-esque, but on the inside, it's very similar to the themes of the animated British sketch show Monkey Dust and the sardonic, bordering on absurdist satire of Chris Morris, creator of the somewhat controversial Brass Eye, a news satire that lampooned British media's over-reliance on scare tactics and sensationalism to ignite public hysteria, much like PSAs. In this sense, Don't Hug Me reminds me a lot of the media I watched when I was growing up that was trying to teach kids mature topics but masking the seriousness behind pre-watershed sensibilities to avoid public outcry, particularly amongst parents. The thing is, in the UK, we take being offended over nothing pretty fucking seriously. For example, when the Queen died and London became one elongated queue for the public to pay their respects, what upset people the most was when 2 TV presenters were accused of bunking the queue, which we consider a war crime in our culture. It's not always in a sort of Twitter outrage cancel culture sense, it's more so every time I was educated in school or on TV about serious issues, it was always presented with the widest possible safety net as to not scare or traumatize kids, understandably, despite media having no problem in using these methods to scare youths away from doing bad things. In other words, there's an underlying hypocrisy to where media is so hyper-curated to be polite and sensitive, but it's okay to forgo that when parents and authority figures get hysterical about broken Britain again. As such, the way I interpret the satire of Don't Hug Me I'm Scared is how it depicts a dystopian modern Britain that's so afraid to address its problems that it would much rather hide and protect itself under the illusion of warm, fuzzy, everything's okay positive energy. However, in doing so, it scares them into submission and never wanting to experience anything in life, as is the case with our protagonists. Don't Hug Me opens with an intensely quiet ambience with a ticking clock accentuating the emptiness in the characters' lives before a sketchbook starts singing about creativity. There's an ironic hollowness to the song, as if the songwriters are desperately trying to force out enthusiasm for the sanitized kids show they work on, as their nihilism and disillusionment slowly bleed through, as if to warn children of the grim, oppressive future ahead of them. When the characters become too creative, black ooze suppresses them from breaking out of their fixed conservative hyper-sheltered mold, even forcing rules as to what counts as creative to maintain the status quo. In this sense, it's similar to how Local 58 takes influence from John Carpenter's They Live, where the attempt to hide the horror is humorously blatant by using escapism and institutions like religion and education in the vein of what Karl Marx called the opium of the masses, which indoctrinates and numbs us to the pain of existence. You'll see these implications more and more as each video progresses, as the characters start to see glitches in what is the proverbial matrix that reveal them to be characters in a false fantasy that's far removed from the dystopian reality, which, now that I actually say that out loud, the reason I thought of Monty Python was because of Terry Gilliam's Brazil. That's what this shit reminded me of. Okay, I'm going to take a quick detour just to give you context, but if you like surrealist satires about anti-capitalism and police state Big Brother stuff that I once compared to the survival game We Happy Few, about a drug that deludes people into thinking a totalitarian decrepit world is all sunshine and rainbows, which was inspired by this, I fucking hugely recommend Brazil. It's an incredibly loaded film that's maybe a topic for a different day, but it's basically this Fritz Lang-esque sci-fi fantasy about a world that operates on sucking the joy and happiness out of people to feed a machine with no reward, but the reason it persists is because we become so numb and desensitized to the world just being what it is that we feel hopeless to ever change it. It's very much a mood that reflects the current state of Tory Britain. Anyway, if you come from the interpretation that Don't Don't Hug Me I'm Scared shows its creators trying to expose the truth of adulthood's stresses and struggles and the Truman Show illusion we're protected under, here we see themes of burnout and creative freedom being smothered by those who dictate the output. For example, when the song ends by saying to never be creative again, it's like suggesting you shouldn't have hope, you shouldn't try because eventually we all get beaten down by the surmounting strains of adulthood. The artists have given up and are grinding out the bare minimum in a world oversaturated with mass meaningless content and pandering to commercialism, which expands further into episode 2, which deals with time, showing how it terrifyingly goes by faster and faster as we get older, further insinuating the inescapable grind of existence. When you're a kid, you dream of fast-forwarding to being an adult and having untold freedom and independence, whereas as an adult you dream of turning back the clock to when you lacked serious pressure or responsibility. As the clock continues to sing about time, the characters and by extension the audience find themselves struggling to keep up with the constant momentum and change as they age and decay into an uncertain future they can't escape from, with the clock soon declaring that eventually everyone runs out of time, almost mocking our futility. You can clearly see how I spiraled into existential dread while watching this, but god damn, this sentiment feels real when you experience depression, burnout, boredom, and loneliness. If there's one thing I regret most about getting older, it's taking for granted how precious time was in retrospect before having all this adult responsibility on my hands. The way it's presented is that there's no time to mourn the past as it'll only hold you back and you'll be left behind. The best thing you can do is bury your head in the sands of televised escapism, put your problems on temporary mute, and distract yourself from the inconsequential blip of insignificance that you are. In the wise, cynical words of Bernard Black, in life all we serve to do is suffer, slave, and expire, which means this can only continue to get worse. Episode 3, Love, goes for a pure Wicker Man vibe when a seemingly peaceful picnic sees a butterfly singing about fighting hatred, darkness, and fear with the power of love, eventually isolating Milhouse and introducing, I swear to God, the cult of Malcolm, who tried to indoctrinate him into sacrificing his sense of self to an alternative opium of false happiness. Now, because we've already dealt with all the social themes, I want to turn your attention to what I hope I'm not alone in saying, and that's the implied theme of molestation with Milhouse's eerie father who looks at porn, the stranger danger vibe of the missing poster, the creepy dog, and the South Park-esque whimsical helper who seduces the naive protagonists into going along with it. The reason I say this is because what makes the sinister undercurrent of Don't Hug Me particularly grisly in the context of UK children's programming is that you might recall Operation Yawtree, which forever changed the UK public perception on children's show business, which was already long contentious to begin with. I mean, just read about Janet McCready's experiences working for Dan Schneider at Nickelodeon and you'll get what I mean. Operation Yawtree began in 2012, 2 years before Don't Hug Me continued, as a result of a significant abuse scandal surrounding then recently deceased hugely prolific DJ and presenter Jimmy Savile, who had assaulted hundreds of victims over several decades. It was essentially a mass investigation into child abuse, particularly in show business, that led to several major arrests, including rock star Gary Glitter and presenter Rolf Harris, who I distinctly remember watching as a kid, thus tainting my own perception of the childhood programming I once consumed. As a result, when I put this Sesame Street-style production against brooding, creepy delivery, I just cannot ignore the deeply harrowing real-world associations that come to mind. I talked about this when covering Matthew Holness's Possum a few years back, that insinuates many of the same themes with a disgraced presenter whose reason for being sacked isn't explained, but the implied perception given the circumstances, especially in British culture, is that he was probably a nonce. However, what takes this utterly poisonous association even further was when I was reminded of a Welsh rock band I was a massive fan of as a teenager called Lost Prophets. They released a music video in the mid-2000s for a song called A Town Called Hypocrisy, where it's framed as a lighthearted educational children's program that unravels into edgelord sex, drugs, and rock and roll shenanigans once the cameras are off, contrasting the tone of the show with the stark reality of adults involved in the making of it. Now, if you don't know where this is going, truly brace yourself, because what's striking is that this video aged worse than milk, because just over 7 years later, the band's lead singer was sentenced to 30 years in a prison infamously known as Monster Mansion for crimes I implore you not to look up. In fact, you can probably easily read between the lines, but what's utterly ghoulish is how this video, that played into the underworld of show business where kids entertainers were stereotypically big drug and party animals, predated Savile's exposure and the disgraced reputation it left on the industry in the broader public eye. The reason I say all of this is because when I think of children's programming and horror, this is the diabolically scary shit that is scarred deep into my soul. When you think of our protagonists, they're basically characterized as naive, vulnerable children being harassed by forms of authority under the guise of educating and helping them. From episode 4, we see the characters break from the illusion that distracts, preys, and figuratively and literally consumes and controls them, framed through the domineering presence of the digital world. In the final episode, our most naive and vulnerable character is completely alone, mourning his missing friends, trying to tearfully fight off the abusive institution he can't escape from. However, before that panic attack well and truly makes me switch off, we cut to the red spaghetti lobster man thing in the real world, which visually reflects the grindy, dull kitchen sink experience its creators write into the illusion, everything of which we've already covered by this point. He eventually discovers a control room and attempts to save Milhouse from the illusion he was able to break away from, but is attacked by Pervert Dad representing the abusive controlling influence, and before long, Lobster Man is able to pull the literal plug, and the ordeal finally comes to an exhausting of course it doesn't. The vicious cycle repeats itself because our existence is futile and we cannot change who's in charge. And with that, I think we're done here. I know there's plenty of subtext, imagery, and storytelling elements I completely missed and ignored. There are dozens of other videos that have covered that stuff before, so there's no point in me retreading and regurgitating the same ground again. So until next time, stay safe, stay away from, well, with this show, everything, and I mean literally everything. We're going to be dealing with an Argentinian horror film next, so I'm sure you can work out what that one probably is. And so yeah, see you all next time. Bye.